There was a moment on July 2nd, 1863, when James Longstreet stood on Seminary Ridge and saw exactly what was about to happen. He had been watching the Union line for hours. He knew the ground. He knew the distance his men would have to cross. He knew what artillery could do to infantry moving uphill in open daylight. And he knew that Robert E. Lee, the man he had followed through 2 years of war, was about to order an attack that would destroy the Army of Northern Virginia as an offensive weapon. Longstreet did not stay silent. He argued. He proposed alternatives. He asked Lee to reconsider. Lee refused. The attack would go forward. What followed was not inevitable. It was chosen. The battle had already been underway for a day. Neither commander had planned to fight at Gettysburg. The armies had collided accidentally when Confederate forces searching for supplies encountered Union cavalry west of town. The engagement escalated faster than either side intended. By the evening of July 1st, the Confederates had pushed Union forces back through Gettysburg onto high ground south of town. Lee had won the first day. His instinct was to press the advantage immediately. But his corps commanders were scattered. His cavalry under J. E. B. Stuart was still missing, somewhere beyond contact, leaving Lee blind to Union movements and strength. The Army of the Potomac was consolidating along a ridge shaped like a fishhook. Cemetery Hill anchored the center. Culp's Hill protected the right. A pair of rounded elevations called Little Round Top and Big Round Top guarded the left flank. Lee did not know how many Union soldiers occupied those positions. He did not know if the entire Army of the Potomac had arrived or if he was facing only an advance guard. He made his decision anyway. Lee ordered Richard Ewell to take Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill if practicable. That word, practicable, carried enormous weight. It left Ewell the discretion to judge conditions on the ground. Ewell had replaced Stonewall Jackson after Jackson's death at Chancellorsville 2 months earlier. Jackson would have attacked. Jackson had built his reputation on aggressive action and intuitive understanding of Lee's intentions. Ewell was not Jackson. He examined the Union positions. He saw prepared defenses and reinforcements arriving. He decided the attack was not practicable. He did not move. Lee never clarified his order. He never demanded the attack proceed. The moment passed. By morning, the Union line was fully entrenched. What might have been possible on the evening of July 1st was no longer possible on July 2nd. Lee did not adjust his strategy. He had committed to offensive action. He believed the Union Army was vulnerable. He believed his army was superior. He believed one decisive blow would break Union morale and open the road to Washington or Philadelphia or some strategic collapse that would force negotiations. These beliefs were not unreasonable. Lee had won stunning victories through aggressive action at Chancellorsville and Second Manassas. His soldiers trusted him. His officers trusted him. The Confederate government in Richmond trusted him. But those victories had been fought on different ground under different conditions against different Union commanders. George Meade had taken command of the Army of the Potomac only 3 days before Gettysburg. He had not chosen this ground. He had inherited a battle already in motion. But he understood defensive warfare. He understood interior lines. He understood that his army held high ground with good fields of fire and strong flanks. He did not need to attack. Lee did. Longstreet had been arguing since the previous evening. He wanted Lee to disengage and move south, forcing Meade to attack Confederate positions on ground of Lee's choosing. Lee rejected the idea. He would not retreat after winning the first day. He would not allow the Union Army to escape. He believed his men could break the Union line. On the morning of July 2nd, Lee ordered Longstreet to attack the Union left flank. Longstreet believed the attack would fail. He did not refuse. He delayed. He repositioned his corps along routes that would conceal their approach from Union observation posts. The delay lasted hours. Lee grew impatient. Longstreet finally moved into position in mid-afternoon. By then, Union forces had reinforced Little Round Top. The attack went forward anyway. The assault fell on a Union brigade commanded by Daniel Sickles, who had moved his men forward from the main line without orders, occupying a peach orchard and a wheat field in front of Cemetery Ridge. Sickles believed the ground offered better firing positions. He was wrong. His brigades were exposed and isolated. Confederate artillery opened fire. Confederate infantry surged forward. Sickles' line collapsed in less than 2 hours. His men fell back in disorder. The Union left flank was breaking. Confederate forces pushed toward Little Round Top, an undefended hill that overlooked the entire Union position. If the Confederates took Little Round Top, they could place artillery on its summit and enfilade the Union line. The battle would be over. A Union brigade commander named Gouverneur Warren reached Little Round Top minutes before Confederate infantry arrived. He ordered the 20th Maine, a regiment of fewer than 400 men commanded by Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, to hold the southern slope at all costs. The 20th Maine was the last unit on the Union left. There were no reinforcements behind them. Chamberlain understood what was required. His men held for over an hour against repeated Confederate assaults. They ran out of ammunition. Chamberlain ordered a bayonet charge downhill into Confederate forces already preparing another assault. The charge succeeded. The Confederates broke. Little Round Top remained in Union hands. The Union left had held by minutes and by the initiative of officers acting faster than their orders. Lee's attack had failed. Longstreet had been correct. Lee did not reconsider. On the morning of July 3rd, he ordered another assault, this time against the Union center on Cemetery Ridge. Longstreet would again command the attack. The plan relied on massed artillery fire to weaken Union defenses before Confederate infantry advanced. Lee believed the Union line was vulnerable. He believed his artillery would suppress Union guns. He believed his infantry, moving in tight formation across open ground, would overwhelm the defenders. Every assumption was wrong. The Confederate bombardment began just after 1 p.m. It was the largest artillery barrage of the war. Over 150 Confederate guns opened fire. The sound carried for miles. The bombardment lasted nearly 2 hours. It looked devastating. It was not. Confederate gunners, firing at maximum range through thick smoke, overshot their targets. Most shells passed over Union positions and exploded in the rear. Union casualties were light. Union artillery commanders deliberately slowed their rate of fire to conserve ammunition and to deceive Confederate observers into believing the Union guns had been silenced. The deception worked. Confederate officers believed the bombardment had succeeded. They ordered the infantry forward. 12,000 men stepped into open fields and began walking toward Cemetery Ridge. They moved in parade formation, line after line, shoulder to shoulder, covering nearly a mile of front. They had to cross almost a mile of open ground under observation and fire the entire way. Union artillery opened fire immediately. Solid shot tore through Confederate ranks. Shell fragments ripped men apart. The lines closed gaps and continued. Union infantry held fire until Confederate soldiers were within 200 yards. Then the entire Union line erupted. Rifles and artillery firing canister at point-blank range shredded the Confederate advance. A few hundred men reached the stone wall at the center of the Union line. They were killed or captured within minutes. The rest broke and fell back. The assault lasted less than an hour. Confederate casualties exceeded 60%. The attack had no chance of success. Lee knew this within minutes of the assault's collapse. He rode out to meet his retreating soldiers. He told them the failure was his fault. He was correct. Lee had violated principles he had followed throughout the war. He had attacked a prepared defensive position without adequate reconnaissance. He had committed his forces piecemeal over 3 days instead of concentrating them for a single overwhelming blow. He had allowed Longstreet's objections to delay the attacks without changing the strategy. He had relied on subordinates to execute complex maneuvers without clear orders or coordination. And he had believed his army could accomplish anything through sheer will and courage. That belief had been earned through victory. It was no longer justified. The Army of Northern Virginia had lost a third of its strength. It would never again invade Union territory. The war would continue for nearly 2 more years. But the South's strategic position was irreversible after Gettysburg. Lee had been defeated not by Union brilliance but by his own misjudgment. The battle became mythology almost immediately. Gettysburg was framed as the turning point of the war. The moment the Confederacy's defeat became inevitable. That interpretation was too simple. The war had no single turning point. The Confederacy's defeat was determined by industrial capacity, manpower, naval blockade, and political will, not by one battle in Pennsylvania. Gettysburg mattered because Lee made it matter by choosing to fight there and by refusing to adjust his tactics when the battle turned against him. The mythology also erased Longstreet's opposition and Ewell's hesitation and Sickles' blunder and Warren's initiative and Chamberlain's improvisation. It reduced a chaotic, contingent series of choices to a preordained outcome. It made Lee's defeat seem noble instead of avoidable. And it allowed later generations to remember Gettysburg as a tragic inevitability rather than a failure of command. Lee never fully explained his decisions at Gettysburg. He submitted a brief report that took responsibility for the defeat without analyzing what had gone wrong. He discouraged discussion of the battle among his officers. He may have believed detailed analysis would damage morale or invite criticism of his subordinates. He may have believed his own judgment had been sound and the failure was due to factors beyond his control. Or he may have understood that he had made a catastrophic mistake and preferred not to examine it too closely. Longstreet spent the rest of his life defending his opposition to Lee's tactics at Gettysburg. Other Confederate officers blamed Longstreet for the defeat, claiming his delays had cost Lee the battle. The argument continued for decades. It never resolved. The truth remained uncomfortable. Lee had been wrong. His officers had known he was wrong. The attack had been ordered anyway. And 12,000 men had walked into fire because one man could not admit his plan had failed. The battle ended on July 4th. Lee withdrew his army toward Virginia. Meade did not pursue aggressively. The armies separated. The war continued. Gettysburg became a symbol. It was never just a symbol. It was a moment when one choice, made by one man who could not accept that the conditions for victory no longer existed, determined the fates of thousands and altered the trajectory of a war. The lesson was simple and enduring. Belief in past success does not guarantee future results. Courage cannot substitute for strategy. And a refusal to adjust to reality, no matter how justified that refusal feels in the moment, produces consequences that no amount of later interpretation can undo. Gettysburg was not simplified too much by history. It was misunderstood. The question was never whether Lee could have won the battle. The question was why he believed he could win it when every piece of available evidence told him otherwise. That question remains unanswered. The men who died there are still waiting for an explanation.